Many portable handheld walkie-talkies, and even a few mobiles, include a feature called VOX. There are some myths and misconceptions about this feature, as well as assumptions about its use as a possible solution for certain applications. To ease the confusion and dispel the myths, we must first answer the most important question of all. What is VOX?
Number one, VOX is the worst acronym in two-way radio, don't you think?
I agree with you there.
VOX, VOX stands for Voice Activated Transmit, somehow.
When I first heard of VOX, I thought it was like voice-operated transmit. And in a way, that to me, that makes just as much sense because you're operating the microphone, as it may be, by voice.
Yeah, I guess. You still have the X in there, which, X, that's used often for transmit and receive. Yeah. So I guess I'll give them the X instead of a T. But
you can call it VOT.
Should be,
or VAT.
Should be VAX.
VAX, yeah. Well, it's not to say we're anti-vaxxers.
we might be anti-voxers, though.
Maybe. In some
most cases, I'm an anti-voxer.
Yeah. Are you really?
There's a few cases I guess I'm pro-vox, but most of the time I'm anti-vox.
In modern use, VOX is an acronym, as you just said, for a voice-activated transmit. What does that mean?
VOX is a way to use a radio hands-free. That's the essence of VOX, right? Wouldn't you say it boils down to that? The idea is that you don't have to press the push-to-talk button. Instead, you turn VOX on and you just talk, and whatever you say immediately goes to all the other radios in your group. You don't have to press the button. It works sort of like a cell phone, I guess. Mm-hmm. You don't have to press a talk button when you're talking on your cell phone. And VOX, the idea is that it works sort of like that.
So in theory, what it does is it activates, in this case, the radio to transmit the sound of your voice as soon as it hears it. It picks up your voice, or it picks up a sound, and closes that circuit to actually begin the transmission. Now, this sounds great.
It does sound great, and I'm sure anyone listening is already picking up on the fact that we think maybe there's some limitations with VOX.
Well, some people are thinking, wow, I could do all kinds of fantastic things with VOX, and well, yes and no.
You got to think about how it is actually working and what's going on. Mm-hmm. Two-way radio is a simplex form of communication generally. You can't listen and talk at the same time. So your radio, when you turn VOX on, it can't always be transmitting. Mm-hmm. It's got to decide when to essentially press that PTT for you to start transmitting. So when you activate VOX, it listens for a sound. Mm-hmm. And whenever it hears a sound that meets certain levels it meets its criteria of a sound, it starts transmitting. And then you also have, well, when do I stop transmitting? I stop when I'm no longer listening to a sound. Well, sometimes you might pause in the middle of talking, or there's a lot of things about the way we talk that are going to complicate the way VOX works.
This is what makes VOX a really tricky thing, because it isn't just simply a matter of turning it on to get the feature to work and just having it work. You really have to set it up properly. And there's a little bit more to it than that, because as you were saying, it hears a sound. It's not necessarily voice. I mean, the radio doesn't discern between what someone's voice is, or what it sounds like, and what right. other sound sounds like.
Usually there's some kind of like sensitivity setting where you tell the radio, like, anything that exceeds, any sound that exceeds this sensitivity threshold, push the talk button and assume you've got a voice.
And so for that reason, it's not really for loud environments, because it can't tell the difference between what's a voice sound and what's extraneous noise outside.
Right. If you're on a construction site, your radio is going to be transmitting all the time.
Pretty much. Because any ambient sound can potentially activate it, any sound at all. It isn't really optimal for use with a microphone that's built into the radio itself for that reason. Now, a lot of people think, well, I can just turn on VOX and I can set the radio on my hip and it's just going to pick up my voice and transmit when I want to transmit. And it doesn't really work that way because primarily the microphones on these radios are not they're not the greatest microphones in the world. I mean, that's just true of any radio.
Well, they're designed to be the microphone on the radio is designed to be used a few inches from your mouth.
Right. It's not designed to be used across a room.
It's not going to work. If you plan on keeping the radio on your belt, you're going to need some kind of headset if you want to use VOX.
Exactly. The thing is, though, you can't just use it with any headset. It has to be a VOX-capable headset.
I'm going to say for best performance, you want to use it with a VOX-capable headset. I think that you could use VOX if you were in the right environment just with the mic on the radio. You are...
Theoretically.
Let's say you're sitting at a desk in a perfectly quiet room and you don't care about, maybe the first quarter of a second of your transmission getting chopped off or whatever when you talk. Mm-hmm. It should work well in that type of environment, depending on the quality of the radio that you have. A good quality radio should pick up what you're saying in a very quiet room where the radio is somewhat close to your face.
But it'll also pick up anything else besides.
Correct.
That's why it has to be a very quiet room.
Correct.
But getting back to the headset for a second, it's really meant to be used with a headset. However, you can't just use it with any headset. It has to be a VOX-capable headset. And the reason is very simple, is that a VOX-capable headset is going to have a switch on this to switch it into VOX mode so that the microphone is always open. On a regular headset, you've got that push-to-talk button. And some folks will say, well, how come I've set up my radio for VOX, I put my headset on, but it's not responding to anything. It's not working. Why isn't it working? Well, the reason it isn't working is maybe because you don't have a VOX-capable headset, where what that little switch does on that headset, you switch it on so it bypasses the push-to-talk switch, keeps that microphone open so the radio can hear you. And if you don't have that, if you just have a regular headset with just a push-to-talk switch, that unless you're holding down that push-to-talk switch all the time, the radio isn't going to hear you. There's nothing going through that microphone. Correct.
I believe the way it works is the radio listens for the sound, but with a regular headset with the push-to-talk, it's not even sending that audio to the radio unless you're holding the button in.
Exactly. So you really want to have a VOX-capable headset plugged in. Now, even so, I should say the quality of headsets with microphones built in can differ quite a bit. So sometimes you can get one with a really decent quality mic, sometimes not so decent quality mic. So there's that. That's something else to consider.
The boom mic, I've heard, works the best. Like if you have a boom mic with maybe a sock to protect from the wind or from maybe to screen out some background noise, things like that a little, and it's right in front of your mouth. Those seem to work really, really well, or as good as you're going to get.
I think that's probably the best type to use for VOX. Now, having said that, you've got the headset factor, but there are a couple of other things to consider too, because VOX performance is also going to vary a bit by radio. It depends on the quality and the circuitry of the radio itself and the different levels made available for VOX, because the VOX features in these radios, you just don't turn it on and off. They have different sensitivity levels, and you have to set it to the right sensitivity level. And you sort of have to experiment and play around with it to find the right sensitivity level. But it's also going to vary by radio. Now, business radios, for instance, they usually have some very high quality circuitry for this, and the VOX sensitivity is going to be a lot different, and the performance is going to be a lot different on a lot of business radios, particularly the higher end business radios, than they are going to be on a consumer radio or on, say, like a bubble pack walkie-talkie. Sometimes the circuitry, the VOX circuitry there isn't as high end or finely tuned, and so your mileage is going to vary. Your performance is going to vary quite a bit.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Switching to a better quality radio will give you better performance. But I still think that if you're having problems with VOX, chances are it's just the technology, VOX technology is just limited in general by the simplex nature of the way two-way radios work, and how it essentially it comes down to it's detecting a sound and it starts sending whenever it detects a sound, and that's somewhat problematic.
You're bringing up another point here, and that's where we get into the suitability of VOX for specific purposes. VOX is not a precise or perfect technology. There are some things that it's going to work okay for, and some things that it's not really suited for at all. For example, some consumers, I should say some users, attempt to use handheld bubble pack FRS radios equipped with VOX as, let's say, a baby monitor. And that's
on the surface, that seems like a good use for VOX.
Seems like a brilliant use for VOX on the surface.
But every radio manufacturer will say, never use a two-way radio as a baby monitor. But I think they're just trying to kind of covering themselves when they say that. And there are much better devices that you can.
Are they, though?
It comes down to, I think, well, I'm not telling anybody to use a two-way radio as a baby monitor. let me just straight up say that. Because there are better devices. If you want a baby monitor, don't buy a two-way radio for that. Buy a baby monitor. You'll be much happier with it. VOX, let's think about it in theory. You've got a quiet room with a sleeping baby. You put a radio in there in VOX mode, and you want it to start transmitting when it hears a noise. That seems like an ideal case for VOX, right?
It seems like it on the surface. However,
break it apart, Rick.
Okay, break it apart.
Down.
First of all, two-way radios were not really intended to be used as baby monitors.
Right. There are better devices to use.
Exactly. Like a baby monitor.
Like a baby monitor. And if this is the safety of your child, really. So,
Yeah. Some people want to say, hey, I've got this pair of little peanut-shaped talk-about radios.
I use them
20 years ago.
Twice a year when I go hunting, and why not use them
and use it as a baby monitor? I can save a lot of money by not having to buy an expensive baby monitor. Now, granted, maybe the baby monitors are being oversold here in comparison to two-way radios. I don't really think so, because I think with a baby monitor, it's designed specifically for that purpose. And because it's designed for that purpose, the circuitry is going to be a little bit different. Sensitivity for that is going to be different. And the microphones are going to be different.
Yeah, I think with baby monitors, now it's been a long time since I had a baby. We're going, but it's been a while. But if I remember correctly, baby monitors transmit all the time. Like you're always hearing what's going on in the room. You're hearing the ambient noise in the room. If the baby turns over, you can kind of hear that and hear it, hit the crib or whatever. If it's, rustling the mattress, you can hear that. And I think you want to be able to hear that.
Yep.
And those types of little noises like that aren't going to activate VOX. There's another thing. If the baby's older and if it can move around from one side of the crib to the other, maybe it gets too far away to activate VOX on your two-way radio. If you're even in a low sensitivity, if you planned on it, the baby being on one end, but he's on the other end,
sure,
you're not going to get the transmission when you want it. Now, if the baby's crying, it's probably going to...
That's an obvious one, yeah.
Yeah, you would think that it would activate it in that case, but maybe it doesn't activate it in some other scenarios.
Sniffling or choking or something like that. I mean, you're not necessarily going to hear that. Now, with a baby monitor, I believe a lot of them, or most of them, if I'm not mistaken, plug into AC power, so they're always on, and they're not constantly draining a battery. And I think there may be some that are battery operated, but my experience has been that they kind of plug into an outlet, and you've always got them on. They're always, like you said, they're always transmitting so that you can always hear them. And that's not the case with the two-way radios. So the walkie-talkies are at a bit of a disadvantage there. The other aspect to this is some privacy. Now, I'm not sure what frequencies baby monitors are on, because I haven't really done a whole lot of research with baby monitors per se, but I do believe they probably use different frequencies than these UHF open frequencies on most of these bubble pack radios, or, like say a GMRS or an FRS or even a MERS radio on VHF.
Probably something in the 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz,
I'm guessing
like a cordless phone.
I'm guessing that. So you have a modicum of, I don't know, a little security, a little privacy, and I would think that you'd want that if you're monitoring your child on that. Whereas, on these radios, everything's kind of open. Everybody can hear what's going on, and I would be kind of concerned about that. If I was going to be monitoring my child, I don't think I would want to be using a device that's just that open.
What's the child going to say that you don't want overheard?
I don't know.
You don't want the neighbors knowing when your child.
I don't know. I just have issues with it.
You are a little more privacy conscious than I am. Yeah. I'm like. I accept those terms and conditions immediately.
I read all the terms and conditions.
Stop it. You don't do that.
I do a lot of the time, actually. Yeah. On occasions, yeah. I'm not going to go into here, but yeah, it's particularly with some of the podcast platforms in the past, yeah.
Just imagine all the things I've agreed to over the years. I may not even have any children. I may have given them all away to Apple or something.
But once again, though, you've got some things that are different with the baby monitors that the radios just are not really that suited for. So it's really best not to do it. Just go out and buy a baby monitor. Now, I remember, here's another example. I remember not too long ago, it was a couple of years back, that there was a discussion. I think it was in the forums. Someone jumped into the forum at twowayradioforum.com and wanted to do something specific. It was another security issue. He wanted to set up a radio outside next to his car and then be able to listen and monitor it while he was inside the house in case, because he was concerned about things like break-ins and things like that. So his idea was, I want to use VOX to, if I heard somebody smashing the window in my car or walking around in front of it or trying the door handle or something, he wanted to be able to hear that so he could be on alert for it. Once again, that's really more for a security system. That the radios really are not the best use for that, for the same reasons, many of the same reasons we already mentioned.
Now, it might be useful, but I don't think, again, that someone would be happy with a radio for that purpose.
Right.
There are better devices.
There are better devices for it. So, and
I don't think it would be the right
job.
Yeah, I don't think that a radio is completely out of the question for that. Mm-hmm. But I think, you're going to be 50% happy with a radio is the solution, whereas maybe a different product you'd be 90 to 100% happy.
True. And that gets us into the overall issue of VOX sensitivity, as we were talking about before. We started to talk about it before, but I kind of want to jump back to that a little bit and talk about how the sensitivity is different. It varies widely. And I have an example here because I ran some tests, because this was another question that someone had asked me. I think it was in the blog one time. And they were asking me about the disparity with VOX sensitivity between different radios. And he was kind of frustrated because he was trying to get the two radios to work with each other. And so I ran a little test on myself. So I did this with a TYT THUV88, an Ocean radio, a couple of Ocean radios, and I compare the similar VOX settings. In other words, he was setting the VOX setting to, usually they run between 1 and 5 or 1 and 10 or 1 and 9 or anything like that in that range on the different radios. It's going to depend on the radio. But he was setting it to level 5 on one radio, and he was setting the other branded radio to the same level. And it would work fine on one radio, but it wouldn't work well at all on the other. And the reason is basically because of the fact that, well, there are two reasons there. One is because the circuitry is going to be a little different. The range, the levels are going to be set differently on those radios between what's a 5 and what's 1 and what's 5 on the other. Also, the microphone comes into play because some microphones are more sensitive on some radios than on other radios. Now, what I found, and I'm going through my notes here on this. Now, the test was performed between a TYT THUV88, and they were both the microphones were built into these radios, by the way, and an Ocean and a Midland, the 3 radios. Now, I use a digital caliper to measure the distance between the mic and my mouth at all times, because you have to have this kind of close to your mouth when you're doing this with VOX. Now, at level 1, it activated a maximum of 3 inches from the mouth on the UV88. In contrast, the Ocean model activated at 5 inches, and the Midland activated at 6 inches. So you can tell already that the sensitivity levels were different.
So even at level 1?
Yeah, because, and it's not just the sensitivity level of the different circuits in the radios, but it has to do with the sensitivity of the microphones themselves. And now when I tested using an earpiece with an inline microphone, the results were largely the same on all 3 radios. So that tells me that was, in that particular instance, that was probably the circuitry more than the microphone.
Yeah, probably the circuitry says level 1 it needs this dB in order to activate. Level 2 is this dB. You could probably have them change it if they could probably update it and make it even more sensitive or less sensitive if they really wanted to.
But that tells you that there are multiple factors here. Now, once again, in my test,
level 1
with the microphone, it was all kind of the same, but
level 1 really on a TYT is not going to be the same as level 1 on an Ocean. It's not going to be the same as level 1 on a Midland or Motorola or Kenwood.
Right.
It's going to be different.